Border Solutions has been working for several years attempting to be proactive during these really difficult times along the border. Since the time I arrived in Bisbee in 1996, I have watched fences being replaced by walls, walls being replaced by higher walls, the installation of lights, sensors, cameras, and the rising death toll. We believe it is time for a change, and we believe we have to have new ways of looking at our problems, ways based on mutual respect and cooperation. It is our hope that today we can begin the process of working together to find positive solutions. And so before we start with the panel, I want to quote Albert Einstein, who said, "The world will not evolve past its present state of crisis by using the same thinking that created the situation."
Thank you all for coming. It's really good to see such a nice crowd here, so many people interested about this. I joined the board of the Arizona Civil Liberties Union 4 years ago when I moved to Arizona, and we, as the collective Arizona Civil Liberties Union, decided that working on immigration and border issues was one of our very top priorities. I officially became the legal director in June of this year, and since that time we've been investigating some potential sources of litigation for the ACLU to get involved with. A little background on the ACLU. It was founded in 1920. It is a nonprofit that is devoted to defending the Bill of Rights and constitutional rights. The ACLU's official position is that it is in support of immigrants' rights. While it's true that the Constitution does not give foreigners the right to enter the U.S., once people are here, they do have constitutional rights, and there is a right that they not be discriminated against and not be treated in some of the ways that we're seeing people being treated. The ACLU is a national organization, and we're working on border issues on a couple of different fronts. We have 2 complaints pending in international fora on challenging the U.S. positions on border policies. In 1999, we filed a petition with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, of the OAS, basically challenging the Operation Gatekeeper policy that was enacted in 1994. Since Operation Gatekeeper came into effect, there's been a 500% increase in deaths along the border of people coming into this country, yet there has been virtually no impact on the number of people coming into the country. In fact, a study done in California showed that 69% of people of employers saw no change in undocumented people coming over, and 23% actually found an increase. So the basis of the ACLU's petition before the OAS is that the United States is violating international human rights laws by having this hypocritical strategy that essentially is designed to maximize the physical risks while doing virtually nothing to reduce levels of migration. That is the legal argument that's pending before the OAS. We also have a similar petition pending before the UN's Commission on Human Rights. These petitions were filed in 1999, and it's taking a long time for any kind of a decision to be made in it. At this point, we really don't know where that is. I understand that the OAS is supposed to be issuing a report sometime in January of 2003. Part of the problem with this is what impact the OAS's conclusion could possibly have on the United States, and so that's one of our concerns. About a month and a half ago, we in Arizona, with the ACLU here, sat down with folks from Derechos Humanos, Isabel Garcia, and some lawyers from California to have a brainstorming session about various legal theories that would work domestically. The problem with doing litigation on border policies domestically is that the Constitution has given Congress really broad powers to regulate immigration. So pretty much every challenge that's ever been made has been struck down, and there's been a lot of concern about mounting challenges and then getting Supreme Court decisions saying Congress can kill zillions of people if that's what they choose to do in terms of enforcing border policy. So most groups that do litigation in the U.S. have decided not to pursue any domestic litigation theories. However, the purpose of this meeting about a month and a half ago was try to see if we could sidestep around that, if there were any sort of clever legal issues that we could come up with. One of the ideas that we thought about was working on the basis of basically property law, which requires that if you own land, you owe a duty to come onto your land. So let's just take Orchid Pipe Cactus National Forest, where there are all sorts of people dying there. It's land owned by the U.S. government. There are legal theories that require a standard of care that you owe to trespassers. You can't just kill trespassers who come into your land. You owe them a small duty of care, but you owe them some duty of care. So that would be one way to get to attacking the U.S. policy domestically, is to use these property causes of action. So one is a duty owed to trespassers. A second is a duty owed to invitees. Invitees, I'm sure you can guess, are people who you've invited in. Sort of like when you have a business and people come in to your store, that person would be an invitee. Similarly, I think you can make the argument that because we are using workers coming into the United States, we are inviting them in here. So we owe them this even higher standard of care than what we owe to trespassers. And certainly under the invitee standard of care, you can argue that the U.S. government has violated that by causing all these deaths. So that sort of basically is what we're doing on the international forum, and we are still just brainstorming and trying to figure out how to attack the border policies on a domestic perspective. A little bit more locally, we have hotlines that we run both in Tucson and in Phoenix. I have some materials out on the table there. I would advise all of you to sign up for our email list so you can be part of you can let us know if things come to your attention. But essentially what we've been doing is networking with a number of different groups that work on border issues and trying to figure out where we can be of service. So for example, I got to know Cecile and Citizens for Border Solutions because they came to us. The U.S. Border Patrol had previously allowed them to be distributing the Know Your Rights cards. More recently, they were told that they could not distribute the Know Your Rights cards to folks detained along the side of the highway. We have been talking with Border Patrol and haven't been able to get a clear answer as to what reason they would have for causing U.S. citizens to not be able to use their free speech rights. And so that's where we are with that position, because at this point they haven't really given us a satisfactory answer, although they did just send me a letter 2 days ago, which I have a copy for you later. But in terms of addressing sort of these smaller issues, that's what we're here for. I'm based out of Tucson 4 days a week, and Cecile knows how to get in touch with me. We are definitely interested in working on some of these issues, and I'm really interested in hearing your comments and what sorts of problems are happening on kind of a day-to-day basis. I've said enough. I'll sit down. Thanks.
I've been in this area since 1999. I grew up in Southern California, so I've been pretty cognizant of border issues most of my life. I was asked today to speak about the effect of immigration on health care, and it's kind of interesting that an article just came out in the Observer this past week, an editorial about the burden to our local health facilities by immigrants. And I have to say that in general, I think this is pretty much of a red herring. I think that the immigrant population is being used as a scapegoat. You know, nationally, the medical system in this country, I think, is in a great deal of trouble. And it's one of the reasons that I work in public health and policy instead of clinical, direct care medicine. The situation is that medical facilities such as emergency rooms and EMS, the emergency medical services, which is your ambulances and helicopters, are not allowed to turn away people. If an emergency room refuses to see somebody and they keel over in the parking lot, they're open to a lawsuit. So the basic concept all over this country is if somebody comes in for treatment to an emergency facility or calls 911, they have to be attended to. So that puts a burden on all the facilities and the EMS services in this country, because some of those people can't pay for their services. And these days we're calling that population that can't pay for their services the gap population. They're the people who make too much money for access and not enough, don't have full-time work or have a job that doesn't have insurance. And that's a very sizable population. It's estimated to be about 40 million people in this country. What percentage of that is immigrants is really unknown, but I would venture to say it is not a very large percentage. Here in Arizona, it probably is a greater percentage than the national picture. And right here in Cochise County, all the border counties, it's probably an even greater percentage. But I would still venture to say that it's not the majority. The Cochise Network Association is a nonprofit organization. It's comprised of 12 health-related institutions in the county. It includes 2 hospitals, 3 hospitals, 2 HMOs, Cochise College, CBIS, Catholic Community Services, the Cochise County Health Department, Cochise Health Systems, the Cochise County EMS Council, and the Bliss Medical Center at Fort Huachuca. And I can tell you that the institutions I work directly with, none of them have, in their accounting system, they have an amount of money for uncollectible bills. Nobody has separated what portion of that amount of money is due to immigrants that I've seen. None of their accounting systems account for that. I know a lot of the ER physicians personally in Cochise County, and I talk to them about this situation. Their estimates vary from, perhaps 20% of the patients they see to 30%. It depends a lot on the hospital. Of course, the hospital in Douglas, for example, probably sees a lot more immigrants. To be honest with you, in medical care, it's not a big issue. When somebody comes into an emergency room, you don't ask that person if they're an immigrant who has legal status here or not. You just don't tend to do that. The issue at hand is medical care, and particularly in the emergent situation. We do have a federally funded clinic in Cochise County, which is the clinic at Chiricahua. And Chiricahua is funded by the federal government to help cover that gap population, of people. In other words, the federal government supports this clinic. They're not dependent on the income they receive from their patients. So Chiricahua is making a big effort to try and handle the immigrant medical care because they are getting reimbursed by the federal government. Chiricahua right now has a clinic in Alfreda and a clinic in Douglas, and I believe is applying for funding for a clinic in Bisbee currently. The new grant is currently underway. And they probably will end up having clinics all around the county, so that will be very helpful. What else? At the network, we're working on many issues. The concept behind Cochise Network Association was to bring health-related facilities and organizations together and to try and work on problems in common. I can tell you that the immigrant situation is not an issue we're working on. We're working on recruiting and retention, we're working on transportation, we're working on technology, the lack of technological infrastructure in Cochise County in general. But we're not really looking at the immigrant situation, which I think tells you that it's not a high priority on those institutions' list of issues to be dealt with. There are a few little ventures going on. A couple of the hospital administrators in Cochise County do regularly go to Phoenix and testify in front of the Senate, and they talk about this issue. Again, I've seen the minutes from some of these testimonies. There aren't really facts and figures, and some of the hospitals have thrown out some dollar figures, but again, I know their accounting systems, and they don't at this time have a way to separate out the unpaid bills due to immigrants as opposed to due to the rest of the, the U.S. citizen population. There is a bill in Congress right now that was sponsored by Senator Hutchinson from Texas, and it has to do with border health. If anybody's interested, I have the synopsis of the bill and what it's meant to provide. And it talks about health facilities within 150 miles of the border and helping those facilities out, but it also does not really directly address immigrants. It addresses things like boosting up the National Health Service Corps, promotor grant programs, grants for distance learnings, prevention and treatment of HIV/AIDS, prevention and treatment of TB, children's health insurance. So again, it's kind of a general public health bill. You know, it would put more funding in those areas, and I don't think, again, having worked with HMOs as well as hospitals in this area, we don't tend to separate out the clients. You know, our sense is just that if they need help and we have the resources, we try to help them. This burden, by the way, doesn't fall too much on the HMOs. And the main HMOs in Cochise County are Cochise Health Alliance, AFCA, and Copper Cities Physicians. The clinics do have a right to turn away people who cannot pay. And if you've been to those clinics and tried to receive services, you may have noticed they tend to ask for money or insurance cards right up front. If it's non-emergent care, they can refuse service, and they tend to do that. Now, on the other hand, it does affect the HMOs a little in one indirect way, which is none of the hospitals in Cochise County have physicians on staff. You know, in other words, the hospitals don't tend to employ physicians. They tend to do it the old-fashioned way, which is they contract with doctors' practices that are located around them. So if they're, now, that's with the exception of emergency room staff. Most of them are hired from agencies, most of the agencies being located in Tucson. But let's say somebody comes into the hospital in Douglas and they need emergency surgery. One of the surgeons from one of the HMOs is going to do that, and they are not going to get reimbursed. You know, if it's a non-paying client, they won't be reimbursed. So indirectly, it does affect the HMOs. But I would say to a much lesser extent than the hospitals or the EMS service. The EMS services, our ambulances and our helicopters, are probably taking the financial brunt of the situation. But again, my personal opinion, working in this area, is that it's not that big as compared to the general population of people in this country who cannot pay for medical services.
Thank you to Border Solutions and to all the communities here on the border who have invited us to participate in this forum. It is still our conviction at Derechos Humanos that our primary task is to build our base communities with bringing information to all of the misinformation that creates positions of hate rather than of mutual respect. So that with that in mind, what I'd like to talk a little bit about is, being that I am a historian and a teacher of history, that we can never forget the historical context of what we are discussing today. And that historical context has to be seen in terms of the very origins of the border and beyond, before there was even a border. And that the issue of immigration, globalization, militarization, and immigrant and border rights is one that is historical. And that is not just, this is just the most recent manifestation of all of these events that have come through time. And so that we need to understand that. For example, the people crossing from Mexico into the United States is one which, if we want to, we can take it to mythical times, right? The idea that the geographical space in which we are is a north-south space. So that those of us who live in this region not only have a different historical, but also a different spatial context. Movement is north-south, not east-west, as is the spatial history of the United States, which was the last comer into this area. So that many of us live in different historical time and also historical space. Some of us are both in a northwest sense of history and on an east-west sense of history as well. Right? Somebody said, I arrived here in 1999. Somebody said, I arrived here in 1996. I cannot tell you when we arrived here. But from time immemorial, we have been here. And we have come through many contexts of communities entering into these lands. And I think that we have to understand that particular context to understand the forces that are at play today. And when we talk about immigrants, for example, the idea that people are crossing from Mexico is not the most current. It's also not the worst time. You know, it seems to us because we are living in this time. But certainly the movement of peoples as a result of the need of the United States for labor has been since, and it was incorporated structurally into the United States economy and the development of the Western economy from the 19th century. There has been a constant need for the United States to fill its labor-intensive industries in the greater West with workers from Mexico, so that we can trace this movement back to the 19th century, particularly after the arrival of the railroad, which allowed for the development in larger context of the industries that are now here in the West. And without, for example, the railroad subsidized by the United States government, the reclamation projects subsidized by the United States, mining, agriculture, and all of the construction and infrastructure of the West would never have been possible. So that large capital investment from Europe and from the eastern part of the United States is what develops places like Bisbee, right? And which controls places like Bisbee, which allows the deportations that occurred here in Bisbee, right? So that what we have to understand then is that globalization is coming around again. This is why we call it neoliberalism, because we had liberalism then. And now it's the neoliberalism. As one historian has pointed out, the only difference now is that whereas before workers could be moved around, now entire factories can be moved around workers and so forth. So that the movement of workers is a long-standing one. And the active recruitment of workers from Mexico is a long-standing one. I mean, where companies for the United States would go into Mexico and recruit workers to work on the railroads, to work in the mines, to work in the cattle industry, to work in construction, to work in all of those, in the fields, in whatever was needed in the greater West, which were the principal industries, right? So that you can look at any statistical information starting from the 19th century, and you will find this phenomena at work. So that what happened is the United States economy, in the West particular, but now nationwide, was addicted to cheap labor from Mexico. And so we're seeing the consequences of that. The United States economy cannot float for a day without this labor. Now, the doctor was speaking about the medical care. What we can look at also is just in the area of Tucson, the people of Sonora and Sinaloa, people from Mexico, buy from Tucson $950 million a year. $950 million a year. Okay, that pays for a lot of hospital care, that pays into sales tax, any kind of tax. That's why You go to Tucson, and the commercial companies fly the Mexican flag, not because they love Mexicanos. They love the peso that is coming in and that buys their commerce. That was what has kept Tucson in the last several years afloat, is that money, as many of these communities stay afloat from that economy. We never refer to this. We're always referring to what they take from us, but what they contribute to this area, not only in terms of their labor, and the wealth of the West is being built on the backs of immigrant workers, especially Mexicano workers. We never point out to those contributions. We don't turn out to look at the contributions of all of the communities that were here before there was a border. As a Tohono O'odham elder said to me, the border pierced our hearts. It divided us. You know, we were united, and now we are divided. We were one community. And that is what the context of the militarization has been coupled with the economic needs of the United States at this stage. So that we have seen the buildup over time. And we can see it just in the budget increases that have been directed to the border, even though there has been no decrease in the movements of people. It's only people being funneled, right? And even the Border Patrol Union itself has declared that. We have not stopped people from coming across. We will not stop people coming across. Why? Because the United States economy needs it. Idaho is recruiting Mexican workers. In fact, in the Midwest and in some parts of the garment industry in the South, entire tiny communities like Bisbee have come alive as a result of Mexican immigrant workers and other Central American workers. And those communities are making it accessible for those people to stay there because it has revived their economies, it has revived their cultural life, it has revived their societies again, it has brought them back to life. So listen to this contradiction. While we are killing people here at the border, and I say we because we're all complicit because this is United States public policy to funnel people through the most dangerous areas so that there they can die. And when they announced this policy, the United States Commissioner of Immigration said there will be deaths. And so since Operation Gatekeeper, over 2,000 people have died at the border. Now, anywhere else, there would be a major outcry. And there is none. And I asked a New York Times reporter one time, why is there no such outcry as like during the Rodney King? And this is not comparing apples and oranges. I just want to know. And he said, because, Lupe, you have to realize that you live on the border. And it's a third world country. Nobody gives shit about third world countries. You know? And so what our responsibility is, I believe, as people rooted in these areas, people who come with respect for living in a multicultural, multiracial, you know, open to all sexualities, to all possibilities. Now, when we come into a place like this, then it is our responsibility to form movements like, you know, Citizens for Border Solutions. How this is going to change for us to create an area where there is that respect is that we're going to build social movement. Nothing ever changes without social movement. I congratulate all the legal avenues that we have to explore. But let's remember that when Brown versus the Board of Education passed calling for the desegregation, ordering the desegregation the United States, because it became law, it didn't mean it happened. People had to take to the streets and create social movement to make the law become a reality. And what we are about then, I think all of us as community, is within a historical context, that we build those forces and those movements that are going to lead us to fulfill truly the challenges and the dreams that are the reality of this country. Thank you very much.
It's an honor to be here with you people. There's a lot of people here that I know that are concerned in the border problems that are happening today. But first I have to tell you that in 1952, 50 years ago, half a century ago, Bisbee was a nice little community. There was 2 border patrol people here. We all knew who they were, Tom and Frank or whatever their names were. And you know, people would come across, and Bisbee depended on Naco, and Naco depended on Bisbee. And the reason I'm saying that, because in 1952, I appeared the first time on this stage as a 5th grade in a play there. And I was just looking back and remembering the good times we used to have there. But now, we have a more difficult time. The world has changed, and we have to get involved in things like this. I spent 2 years in the legislature, and believe me, 4 times I had to fight against militarization on the border here. And I know that that's not the way to go, you know. I drove through Tucson the other day, and the border stations there outside of Tombstone were gone. And you know what? That was a refreshing sight to me, because, thank you. I think it's definitely Mr. Colby and I were very much against having those things there. And at least if there was something, maybe I didn't accomplish it, but at least in the 2 years, that border station is gone. And I haven't been to the other, but I hope the other ones are gone too.
Hi folks, how you doing?
Doing
United
well.
States Border Patrol, immigration check. Can you state your citizenship, please?
American.
United States.
Okay, have a good day.
This problem, like the lady said here, is something of economics. You know, it's okay for them to come over here to work, but it's not okay for them to die on the deserts there. Not for me. It's not okay for them to die in the deserts. We should have some kind of a program. Back in 1953, we had the Bracero program, and now we're trying to work for a guest worker program. And I think that that's the way it's supposed to be. That we should live as neighbors, and if they come over here and work, we should pay them decent wages, and we should give them benefits. But that's the problem. They do not want to do that. They wanted to pass a bill in the legislature saying that they would fine any of these people that would hire the immigrants coming over here. You know what? It didn't even get past the committee because the Republicans did not let it get past there. And as I see around here, I see Frank Peters here. 2 weeks ago, he and I and some other people took a walk from St. Joseph Church over to the mission in Tucson. He said it was only a little block, about 8 blocks, but it turned out to be 8 miles. But it was well worth it. It was well worth the walk, because there people were showing that they care about what's happening on the border. They said over 2,000 people have died. No, probably if we knew, there's probably about 4,000 people that have died, if God would tell us the truth. And I think that there has been that many people dying there. And we have to get out there. Social change is not done by public policy in Congress or in the legislature. The change comes from people, exactly what we're doing today and what we shall continue doing. And I think that we have to show our unity and our strength and let our public policy makers know how we feel, and it has to be changed. Do we want to see one more person die in the desert? I'm sure it's a resounding no. And I hope that everything that we can do collectively and individually is going to be something that is going to be a credit into the future. And thank you very much for allowing me this time to speak to you. Thank you very much.
I echo a lot of Bobby's comments that it is, for true social change, you need people. But you also need leaders. You need people representing you also. And it's very much of a shame that Bobby's not going to be able to represent you anymore in the legislature, but he can represent you as a person who knows people from within. Because I think that you need people working within and without to get things done. I know that Edith asked me to talk about potential solutions to this myriad of problems that we have, and it's a very, very difficult issue, as you know. I got to echo my concerns about the deaths on the border and in our county. There were over 40 deaths in Cochise County alone in this past year, and that's just horrible. And as Bobby mentioned before, there's probably more that we haven't found. And many things have happened this year with mistakes with carrying bodies without respect. That was uncalled for and really a horrible thing. And I was hoping that Miguel was going to be here. I don't know if he's going to be.
I spoke to his office yesterday, and I certainly expect him.
But you know, I have made my personal apologies to the Mexican consul about how that family was treated and how many other families were treated that way that I don't know. Let me say a little bit about the militia movement situation. Militarization, militia movement, we have many things going on in this corner of the woods. And it got national press, this Tombstone Tumbleweed thing with, I don't know how many of you know in the room and all the students that know, but there's a gentleman writing about wanting to create a militia movement in Tombstone. There's already a couple of militia movements on the border. These are other people that think just the opposite about the people in this room about this problem. It's very strange. There's, you're concerned about the deaths. They're concerned about their private property rights being attacked, and they want to take up arms, really, to either assist the military or take justice into their own hands. That's going on as we speak. In a room full, there are 45 people alone in Tombstone. So, I mean, they would fill rooms with people who don't really feel, I think, the same way that you feel about this. So this is a huge issue. People are at their wits' end about what to do, about this loss of life. To give you an example about how I'm involved, but try to keep my persona in government at the same time as expressing my view. The Tombstone Tumbleweed is, quote unquote, the official newspaper of Cochise County because they got the county legal advertising contract. This young man, Chris Simcox, who was the editor, came to town last May. He bid and underbid the contract from the Bisbee Observer, who had it in the previous years. And to be honest with you, when I first met him, he seemed like a reasonable guy. He still is a coherent guy when you talk to him. He's not a lunatic, but he definitely has some fringe views about his freedom to associate as a militia and bear arms. So I was having coffee down at the coffee house the other day. I saw Nacho, and I mentioned it to him. Nacho, have you heard that this Tombstone Tumbleweed editor is writing strong views about a militia movement? And Nacho hadn't heard. And evidently, it became involved with this forum, which is why I'm glad I'm here today. And this is how everything all comes together. Evidently, Isabel Garcia, who's a wonderful human being and a great lawyer in Tucson, who's a friend, also knew about the Tombstone Tumbleweed editorials, and she actually was so threatened by the atmosphere that she decided not to be here today. So when Edith invited me to come, I wanted to come because she wasn't here, and it's horrible to think that a person of that renown and that great spoken person wouldn't want to come to Cochise County out of fear because of this militia movement. Getting on with my story about Nacho. Nacho wrote this very simple article, and I did not, in the article, I didn't want to I wanted to respect his First Amendment right to say what he said. I didn't agree with it at all. But I wanted the issue to come out. After that, around 4, in fact, there's a gentleman in the room who wrote an article that the 4 mayors all around here, the Bisbee mayor, the Sierra Vista mayor, the Douglas mayor, and even the Tombstone mayor, came out against this person. And that's all part of our public colloquy. It's how we get motion together. I was on an interview, WOR in New York, a couple of days ago on this issue. And I told them that's not what the people around here feel. And anyway, that's one side of the story. And then another side of the story is Bobby had very hopeful news about what's going to happen with the militarization on the border. And I got to tell you, right now, post-election, thank God we have a governor-elect that I don't think is going to bring the National Guard down to the border, no matter how much people cry for it. But nationally, we will probably see more Border Patrol agents here. And even though they took the stations away from Tombstone, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a full force along the border. And this whole area will even become more militarized. That may be good in a sense because maybe less people will die. I mean, in the near term on people dying. But it's a big cultural shift for our area because it may mean a permanent force on the border, for as long as terrorism is around, for a long time. Now, the one hopeful sign I do see, and a possibility of happening, is that if we all push, if we all talk, and we all talk to our congressmen and senators, and we all in this room should be doing that, is that there is a possibility that there will be some historical agreement, understanding that there needs to be a labor trade. And if we're going to have NAFTA, you should have true free labor across borders. But that's a long way. That's a long way down the road. That's a big solution, a historical solution. One other thing I just wanted to close. I had thought they have this militia movement now with people carrying guns, and they're wearing camouflage uniforms, and they'll be here on their private property. There's not much that the government can do. They can do something off their private property. But I was thinking that another movement that we could do, and I know that the Senator, some of the people involved in this program are concerned about this, but there could be some sort of civilian border corps, with people of goodwill trying to help out on border problems. One of the things that the ranchers want to take up arms about is that their ranches are being trounced on and there's garbage being left, and they're upset about that. And that is a true environmental issue that I think that people in the federal government are concerned about too. And there's a possibility to sort of have a civilian corps on the border. Around 6-8 years ago, we had a border volunteer corps for around 2 to 3 years that was functioning. It was an AmeriCorps program, a domestic volunteer corps. And I think that we can get something like that, which would be a hell of a lot more enlightening than having a militia movement here, a true conservation corps, if you will, for the border. It might help the environment a bit. As far as, again, a macro thing, I push for it in a number of different forums. The county is involved in something called the Border Counties Coalition. I'm in a coalition with the counties from Texas to San Diego. And we push a lot of programs, a lot of reimbursement programs for the immigration problems, reimbursement to the local taxpayer, county taxpayer. We're trying to get federal reimbursement. But the other thing that we're pushing for on many levels is a easing of the labor restrictions that exist, which can be done. I mean, there's jobs that are needed in Arizona, there are jobs that are needed in Buffalo and Miami and Boston, and the government needs to recognize that that having this horrible, horrible program of pushing these people into the desert to get to New York or Buffalo or wherever they're going and then dying on the way is just totally inhumane. There are many people in Congress who agree, but as was mentioned before, if you take those counties from Texas to San Diego in one body, if you put them as one state, if you will, on the border, it would be the poorest area in the United States, even more poor than Appalachia. And we don't have as strong a voice because of that But if you truly put the politicians of California and Texas together, unfortunately, Texas is kind of schizophrenic because they have George Bush. But if you put all the good politicians of Texas and California and Arizona and New Mexico together, we do have quite a lot of power to change the labor practices. So that's all I have to say, and thanks very much.
Well, one other thing I'd like to add is that when we talk about some of the accusations that are made by those who call for more militarization of the border, whether it's legal by making a public policy or extra legal by calling for militia and allowing them to fester by the authorities within these communities, okay, because they exist because the sheriff permits them to exist, and hate groups that are permitted to have a voice. And I'm not here criticizing those freedoms that we have for free speech. I'm talking about crimes. So, but one of the things they use is a premise that the border is out of control, right? The border is not out of control, okay? There are 250 million legal crossings between the United States and Mexico every single year. Actually over, because that doesn't include the commercial crossings that are very closely monitored, including x-rays, as Cecile had that experience. Between Canada and the United States, there are over 100 million legal crossings. So when we're talking about, in quotes, the entries without inspection or illegal entries, it is minuscule in terms of the issue. It is tiny, in other words. And yet, if we look at the budget, in 1993, the INS was given $1.5 billion. It is now projected for the year 2003, it is going up to $6.3 billion. Okay, which means that people are making money from this, right? Think of all the people who have to sell services to the Border Patrol, all of those explorers and all those toys they have, all those fencing. You know, if you add up, $6.3 billion is a lot of business. Privatization of jails as well. So this has become what Eisenhower called in his farewell address, the industrial military complex is now the homeland security and the border issues. And of course now with making war, because some of the arguments that I have been at forums by the militia groups is they don't want war with Iraq, they want war with Mexico. And so they want the war to come here to this border, right? And so I think that those are what we have to, who's making money here?
What you all need to be doing is asking your county attorney and asking your county sheriff to go after American Border Patrol or the American Patrol or the Ranch Rescue Group if they are indeed impersonating Border Patrol agents. It's my understanding that the American Border Patrol drives in similar vehicles, they are armed, they wear uniforms, and for all intents and purposes they hold themselves out as Border Patrol agents. If they can be arresting Joe Arizona for impersonating a DPS officer simply by wearing a jacket, it seems that American Border Patrol should be able to be susceptible to that. Pressure needs to be put then on the county attorney's office and on the county sheriff's office to prosecute that, and that pressure needs to be done through political. And so here you go.
Yeah, this is all this is complex. It's not yes, if for impersonating an officer, yes, but it's a funny country we have. You have a right to dress up in a uniform on your own private property. You have maybe a right to have no clothes on. What I'm trying to say is that there's constitutional rights in this country too. So they have a right to play games on their property in uniforms if they want to, as long as they don't endanger anyone else. So that's where the county attorney has not prosecuted so far. However, there have been some reports where perhaps these groups have stopped people on the highways of Cochise County, not on private land, and some other places not on their private property, they were on other people's private property without the proper permission. Those are the kind of instances that can be prosecuted, and for whatever reason have not been prosecuted yet. But you're right. Your vote and your urging your leaders to do this can make a difference, and perhaps even going over their heads could make a difference, perhaps to the state attorney general or the U.S. attorney. So, no, those are the kinds of things that we could look at. But it is complex. I don't think the officials are looking away on purpose, but they're not really looking at it to fix the problem. They're sort of scared of the problem.
Well, unfortunately, the time has come. And I want to thank everybody for their participation, and particularly the youth advocates.